All right, it's Warren Huart here. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm sitting with my friend Ken Sluiter. How are you?
Warren, I'm good.
We're back at the sweet spot.
That's true.
But you've moved rooms.
I flipped the rooms around. That's true. Basically, let's see, to make a short story long, this was the live room. It wasn't huge, so we couldn't get a tight drums and in the vocal booth sound, and we couldn't get like a Sound City or Sunset sound. So we couldn't get a good sound in here. As you make a record now, there's just so much happening in the control room that I proposed to Marc and Tim, my partners, that we should flip the rooms around, abandon trying to get a big drum room sound, and turn our little control room into a drum room.
Great.
But I record bands in here where I'll have them on headphones in here with talkback mics while the drummer's in there, and it feels rock and roll. It feels like we're working in a studio. And when you do overdubs, it's just so nice to not have to deal with talkback microphones for guitar overdubs and stuff like that. And the keyboards are all in the control room, and people can just stretch out. It's comfortable. It's fun to be in here. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
What do you use for headphones, by the way? What's your headphone distribution?
We got this little Furman, the little white HD. Private Qs are my favorite sounding ones.
Right.
I like the Furman big blue ones, but they're expensive. These are nice because they give you a little bit of control, but not too much control. So you still have to dial a mix in, but you can give them a more me so that they want more of themselves or whatever. In general, it's funny, if you record the way I like to record, which is put all the faders, all your monitor faders to 0, and record everything at the levels that you think sound good, where you build the mix into the recording. But if you do that, in addition to making your life easier, it actually makes headphones work better. Everything just kind of comes together. And these actually, I think, sound pretty good.
Fantastic.
I like them, so yeah.
And apart from the fact that the room's flipped over, there's been a big difference. We now have this
we have a
huge difference.
A proper recording console. I still mix 100% in the box, but for me, I love to be able to blend microphones onto one track. So if I have like 3 microphones on the kick drum, I'll put those onto one track. 3 microphones on the snare drum, they go onto one track. Or if I'm overdubbing and say I have 3 microphones on a Marshall cabinet, I can blend those all together and just run them out of track into a compressor. And rather than having, say if you're gonna do a modern guitar rock record, you're going to have 5 or 6 guitar tracks on there. I don't want to see 20 Pro Tools tracks. I want to see maybe the microphones, and maybe you can print a DI as well. But make Pro Tools be manageable. Sometimes I like to have, say if these are 3 microphones, I might have them go into a compressor in parallel that I'll sneak in to the track a little bit to give it a little bit of finish. And then you're not really compressing the overall track, you're just sort of boosting the RMS of the track a little bit. And as we were just talking about before, the aux sends on this console sound so good and so big, and they sound just as good as a bus output, it makes that kind of stuff easy. Yeah. So even though I am a staunch 100% in the box mixer kind of guy, I can appreciate a recording console as a great tool for recording.
Yeah, we talked about this last time because you had just purchased it. It was sitting in this room when that was still your control room.
Marc purchased it.
Did?
I can't afford that.
Marc bought it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's a beautiful console.
Yeah.
And I made a record.
I emotionally own it.
Hey,
enough.
I made a great record on one of these, and just we were talking about it, and you just brought up the auxiliaries. I used every inch of it, and that's what's so wonderful about this console. I can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah.
You can use every inch of this console.
Yeah, for sure.
There's some Shadow Hills down here.
I haven't really checked Marc bought those. I haven't really checked them out yet. I think we were wanted to see about piano. I think it was, and maybe vocals. It's funny, certain things for drums and guitars, I'm done experimenting with mic pre's for those instruments. In other words, it's either API or need for me,
Well, plus now you have 16 channels of API. You've got all your transients hitting together. Your phase is probably unbelievable now.
Yeah, it really makes a difference. But for lead vocals and acoustic guitars, I'll try anything. But that being said, obviously, I recommended that we just get more, it seems a little odd when you have 16 API mic preamps to buy 4 more, but I love them, and I love that they have meters on them, so they're really handy to have. These are cool. These Neves powered by 15-volt power supply sound a little different than the 24-volt that we're all used to. I think so. I don't think that they're, to me, APIs are, like, Neves are just big. APIs punchy. It's a different vibe. This sounds punchy, but maybe not as big as some of the 1073s that we have in the racks that have 24-volt power supplies. They're just deeper and bigger.
Now the Tannoys?
Tannoys, this is inherited from, I work a lot with Joe Chiccarelli, and he turned me on to these. When I met Joe in the 90s, this is what he was using. And I have a pair at home. I mix at home quite a bit, and we have a pair here. The wonderful thing, there's a bunch of wonderful things about these. I really like coaxial speakers. You can just hear a lot of detail, but also you don't need a subwoofer with these. I mean, they really move air in the low end. You can really hear low end with these guys. And I love them.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I grew up on Tannoy's little golds.
Yeah, this is the Tannoy Active, this is their modern version of the golds, I believe.
Right.
And they're hard to find now, and they're not cheap either because they're really hard to get.
Pair of NS-10s, are you using those frequently?
I would say that I've used NS-10s for the majority of my career as my main speakers, mainly for mixing. Usually I track on these and I mix on these, and I have this exact same configuration at home, NS-10s with Tannoys. I enjoy mixing on NS-10s less than ever. I just really hit a wall with them. But that said, the last few things I've mixed, I went back on NS-10s and the notes were minimal. And particularly, I think with low end, I think I mix low end better on NS-10s, because even though NS-10s don't have a ton of low end, when you're adding too much low end to your mix with NS-10s, you hear the mix, you hear the low ends interacting and making the thing fold or hit the compressor in a funny way. I love NS-10s, I love the results I get, but it's not a lot of fun to listen to. I know. Right. My wife, I remember one time, she was like, "Oh, your studio monitors are going to sound incredible." And the first time I sat her down and played her, she's like, "This sounds terrible." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind of," but this is, in my opinion, I think it's the crossover. I think that the crossover between the woofer and the tweeter is very, very similar to the average consumer model. So I think that when you get your vocal balances and stuff, I think that when you get them on NS-10s, I think they're going to translate better onto. Right. So, and these are powered by Macintosh in this room.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody was debating me about, because I was saying for kids up and coming, I don't want them to use hi-fi speakers because hi-fi speakers generally have absolutely no peak RMS, so you can easily just be too dynamic with the guitar and suddenly.
Sure.
Boom,
Oh yeah.
I blew up my parents' hi-fi speakers within 20 minutes of plugging my guitar into it.
Sure.
But the thing about, and this is what's great about these things, that they have a massive peak RMS. If you put a clean signal through this, you can just go bang, and the dynamics, and they just pop back happily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever blown a driver on an NS-10. And I mean, I've been using them for a long, long time. And
tweeters, not me personally, but I had assistants blowing out tweeters a lot back in the olden days when people were tracking everything through NS-10s. Now I always have two pairs of monitors, same as you. I have Genelecs, so I'll crack on my Genelecs before anything else. I tend to stay on them these days.
I compulsively turn the monitors down when I walk out. If I'm going to go move the microphone,
right?
I'm muting the channel or turning the, just
making sure that nobody can blow up your speakers.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So
wonderful. Let's have a quick look around.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, I have an LG ultra wide as well.
I'm a big fan of the ultra wide. Once you have ultra wide, it's really difficult to go back.
Once you've had ultra wide, you'll never go back.
That's right.
It doesn't really rhyme, but.
And if you don't need the VESA adapter, if you're just fine, they're cheap. The $150, Best Buy, I
have one as well.
Plop them on your desk. Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah, we like it. It's like, you can, and then you can, if you want, you can have both screens on one place and just move your head slightly. You don't have to have two screens.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your edit and your mix window if you want them there in one place.
Yep.
It's a much smarter way of going. All right, so let's start with the left over here.
Okay.
LA2A, are you using that a lot?
Yeah. Everything you see here is more or less, with a couple of exceptions, sort of the meat and potatoes. And one reason why I like to stick to the meat and potatoes is if I'm at a proper studio and I'm using the sort of standard gear, if I need to punch into a track, I have a 160 VU, I have a Distressor. So if I go to Sunset or East West or one of those places and dial in a chain of whatever they have in their room, if I need to come here, they change a chord. I have, the preamps more or less and the EQs and compressors to match the sound enough that I can drop into a track. So I definitely stick to, I like the LA2A. This is an original one. This is a reissue.
Yep.
Tom Herzer did all the modifications on this. I actually prefer the reissue. He said that he didn't modify the circuit. He just went through and just replaced a few components that he could find higher quality versions of. Like instead of using electrolytic caps, he used film caps and used more what he thought Bill Putnam would have preferred.
Oh, okay.
That's what he told me.
It's way above my education level.
I'm not that technical, but
you like the way it sounds. And
I have to say, when I want an LA2A, these days the Tube Tech is blowing my mind. It's doing the It's doing the LA2A thing, but with the little extra something.
I always think of Mark Endo, who I'm a big fan of as an engineer, a producer, and of course a mixer. And whenever I go into mix, there'd always be a CL1B on a vocal.
Yeah. It's not just for hip hop anymore.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's really, really great.
So going down the rack a little bit. So over here you got a couple of Pulse Techniques. So you got Steve's stuff.
Yep. And
love Steve. That's really great to see.
And these are the mastering versions, so they're clickable.
Yeah, I have them on my master bus. Do you use them on your master bus?
No, because I mixed in the box.
Oh,
see, it has a trick question you're trying to. No, I use those when I'm tracking. It's kick and snare.
I love the mastering version. It's great. You can record.
Yep. So kick and snare when I'm tracking.
Oh, nice.
And
60 and 100. Nice.
Yeah, usually
10 and 10.
Yeah. And guitars. I'll have those 3 microphones going into a 1176, going into a Pultec, and just
nice.
Bass.
Do you sum multiple mics on guitars?
That's always, yeah.
Okay.
I'll never print them onto separate tracks because I want to get the balance. I want to get it.
Fantastic.
Commit to that.
So 1176. So compression into EQ.
Sometimes I'll do EQ into compression into EQ if I can.
Oh, okay.
If I have enough time, I like that because a lot of times what I like to do is cut the low end out and then bring back the opposite.
Yeah.
That's it. I like to do that on vocals and mixing as well. Sometimes take all the low end out before the compressor.
Yeah.
So that way it gets the compressor, it's really tight, and then you just add it back in and it evens it out a little bit.
Yeah. I like that trick. It's very nice.
But if I have to, I'll do. If I only have one EQ, I'll usually do EQ before the compressor these days.
And you'll boost a little bit more drastically, and then you get that little spanky sound because the compressor pushes it back in.
It sounds a little more just electric. It makes, to me, it makes the EQ sound a little more drastic and active than it does.
Well, that was always the thing that we liked about SSLs was the channel out. So basically, you go EQ smashing into the compressor.
Yes.
And it gives you that quang kind of SSL sound. I always feel without doing that, it doesn't really sound like an SSL.
No, it sounds too natural. And when I think of electric, I think of SSL. You know what I mean? Like a vintage Neve console. I mean, it has transformers, but it's SSL to me just sounds more modern, more like zzz.
Yeah.
It's got a zzz on everything, which is when you want it, it's great.
Yeah, when you want it. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's that.
And then the Macintosh, which is driving the NS-10s.
Yep, this drives the NS-10s.
API power supplies. All right, so we're going to flip up over here. So you got a pair of the old Vintex there. I
love these things. I bought these probably about 13 years ago. I'm not going to spend money on a 1073. I'm the value. I need the best value I can get.
Right.
And I think that as far as like the clones, whether it be microphones or 1073s, I think that if you're a commercial studio, you gotta have to have the real thing, because if you're an engineer and you want to book time, you don't want to see if the studio owner's idea of the real thing is right. But for me, I just thought to myself, well, I'll buy these and check them out, and if I don't like them, I can turn them.
Do you have a favorite application?
Kick and snare.
Kick and snare.
Vocals.
Yep.
Everything. Bass DI is fantastic. I love bass. I use this anywhere. I would use a 1073, and I use a 1073. If I have a room full of 1073s, I'm be totally happy.
Great.
And I feel about the same way with the API stuff. In other words, for me, it's more about, is this equipment above my line of acceptability? And if it is, then I'm cruising and I'm happy.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and these are great to have. I think that these are probably one of the best values in the business to this day. And just having a little fader at the end. And I worked a lot in Studio 2 at East West, and I was working on a project that had started and then took a break, and then when it continued, the entire console had been recapped, and to me, the recapped console reminded me more of this. So I think a lot of times when people get the new gear and they don't think it sounds as warm as old gear,
I know
it's
where you're
because it's
going.
newer.
Yes.
It's because it's newer. So in 10 years' time, this one will be sort of broken in and will be warmer.
We were earlier talking off camera about Jim Scott.
Yeah.
And he mixed an album for me that I produced years ago. And he had that RCA Neve, which I'm sure he still has.
Yeah.
And I go over there and we're sitting down and we're talking music and gear. And I was like, he's like, oh yeah, I had my RCA completely rebuilt. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, it's totally recapped and I had this cleaned and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what's the difference now? And he reached over and he goes, I used to have, here's a boost. So he goes, I used to do this. Now I do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like, it just works better.
Yeah.
Basically, it's just like, it sounds like it, he goes, it sounds like it did when I first used it when it was practically new.
Yeah.
So I do agree. I think sometimes we think of vintage as basically, and this is a joke, but doesn't pass current as well anymore.
Perhaps, yeah.
I mean,
I think it must be recapping, but like, you know, with this, just breathing on the shelf is all you usually, this doesn't usually sound very good. If you're doing this on a 1073, that something's amiss. You know what I mean? Yeah, something's not right. But yeah, I love these. I highly recommend these.
I know they're very affordable, so that's great to hear.
Yeah, I think that they're a great value.
And then the DBX 160s, huge fan.
Yep, love it on bass. Really just makes a bass poke out in the mid-range in a nice active way. The sound that a VCA compressor gives as the signal's hitting the threshold, I love. This isn't one of those compressors that you really need to bury the meter. If you just see it kind of bouncing, you'll hear it before you see it. You'll hear the compression before you see it. Love it on bass, love it on sometimes on vocals. Not usually for tracking, but for mixing. It doesn't come up as often anymore, but back when I used outboard gear for mixing, I would often use these on lead vocals. Love it on acoustic guitar.
I still use them on lead vocals. I have a 165, which is the same, but with variable attack and release.
Yeah.
But
you leave it in auto.
I even auto.
You leave it in auto.
So it just sounds like that.
Yep.
But I do the Dave Jordan trick, which is
tell me that.
the 116 to 1176. So that's on 20 to 1. This is on around about 2 or 3. So this is like tapping, and this is occasionally, occasionally getting the peak.
Oh, okay.
So this controls on a limit like the really aggressive kind of like wah that goes for it, and this is just tapping the whole time.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, in general, I like multiple compressors barely working as opposed to making one work a ton.
Because they all sort of work in slightly different ways, so they seem
You've hedged your bets a bit.
Yeah, that's nice.
And if you have a dynamic singer, one of the three compressors will grab whatever, whether it's a lot of low end or a sharp peak.
Distressor, that's like a Swiss Army knife.
Classic. I just replaced the battery in it recently, and I ran into Dave Durr, and I was telling him, I'm like, this it's funny I'm meeting you because I actually just replaced the battery, and I had to solder it off the circuit board, and I don't normally do that. And he's like, yeah, I get nervous when I do that myself. And I'm like, oh, don't tell me that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's funny. I go in and out. I use it a lot, and then I back off, and I don't use it for a while. I used to use it for tracking all the time. This probably gets the most use for me on mono room mics for drums. A Distressor is a great example of a compressor, and in general, I never worry about how much it's compressing. I look at how quickly it's recovering. You know what I mean? If you take a Distressor and you're just burying it in the meters, just living down here.
This has been on a room mic, I can tell.
Yeah. It's all you're doing is you're just turning it down.
Yeah.
I want to open up the release and get that thing so it's really moving, and you can even time it and get it to the beat. One thing that a lot of people don't know about a Distressor is that you have all these distortion settings, which aren't like a guitar pedal distortion, but just like a little bit of harmonic distortion. But if you add it to the link without another Distressor, that's even more distortion. So my favorite setting is that, and then maybe, usually for whatever reason I gravitate towards distortion 3, maybe 10 to 1, and then just really work the attack and releases
Yeah, that's the classic 1176, isn't it?
Yeah. I really love this for this is this is a good vocal compressor. It's a good guitar and bass compressor, but I really love it on drum room mics, mono room mics.
Wonderful.
Everyone loves these. I'll live, when in doubt, 10 and 2 o'clock. This.
Yeah.
When I use it in the box, I should mention, when I use an 1176 in parallel mode, when you use a compressor in parallel, it totally changes your attitude towards the attack and release. So a lot of times, like, I'll set up things that I would never use on an insert, and you can have much more aggressive settings. One thing I love on drums is the all buttons in, and then just really crank up the input is really nice.
What do you find, because on parallel, you just want that continuous energy, so you don't really want to hear it give up. So you might slow your release down here, so it's more like,
Well, and also I don't need to preserve the attacks, because the attack is preserved because it's being blended in.
Yep.
So I'll kick this back, and so next thing you know, this whole thing is, if you listen to it by itself, it sounds terrible, but when you blend it in, it sounds really good. But this is I love 12-to-1 on acoustic guitar for whatever reason. Sounds more like Traveling Wilburys to me. Like if you want like a really upfront acoustic guitar sound, 12-to-1, maybe even 20-to-1. I've never heard the difference between, some people say this sounds different than this, but to me they all sound the same when I do the all buttons in.
Right. Yeah, I've never tried that either.
And these are newer ones. I mean, this is a reissue. This was one of the first reissues. This is like serial number 200, so it's like of the first batch.
Right.
I think that there might have been a run where they didn't have the exact same parts, and some people were saying that the reissues didn't sound as good as the originals. I would say that this sounds, and these I would even say, sound like an average 1176.
Sure.
Now, I've never heard a Magic reissue, and I have heard a few Magic Uris. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Jim Scott has a Magic one. The top one at Ocean Way sounds better than the bottom one. I've ran across a few here and there.
Like the Magic ones, because I've used the Magic one at East West Ocean Way, at United, sorry. It just has a little bit of a bite, like a crunchiness to
Yes.
it. 1176, before the Distressor, was like the most versatile compressor.
Sure.
Obviously. It had fast enough attack and release times that you could do some fun stuff with it. But when the Distressor came out, it just changed the game. I mean, those are like so fast, it's amazing.
Yep.
And the nuke function was amazing. That was just like life-changing, I remember. But the thing about an 1176 was they always had that little crunchiness, which is why I like the two together, because this is kind of a little darker.
Yep.
And this always seemed to retain it. But, maybe I'm overthinking it, but I've got to be honest, going back to what you were saying about the reissues, I've done it. I messed with a producer years ago because he was telling me, A over C over E over G over F over whatever revision. Yeah. And I was just like, my head was blowing up. And we had a reissue, and we had the one that he thought was amazing. Mm-hmm. And he's like, look, I told you this sounds amazing. And it was the reissue.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. And I've talked to, and there's different opinions here and there. And I mean, at the end of the day, you have to use your ears. But, I know that, Jim Scott said, yeah, I've used the reissues. They sound right to me. Yeah. And so
we'll trust Jim Scott.
I'm not worrying about it then. If it's okay with, if it passes Jim's,
Exactly. Some Car. Oh no, those are the Neves, but they're the same as the Carex with the same.
The Neve broadcast. These used to be mine, and then I sold them to my friend Tim Boland, who's one of our partners here.
Okay.
And that's how I met him. I met him through an eBay, it was either Craigslist or eBay.
Nice.
I sold these Neves to buy these because for a few, and the main reason was I wanted a fader.
Yeah.
And this doesn't have a fader. These are great. These are really big sounding. They're really good.
I love these. I love these on electric guitars because you can just get in there and go, I want a bit more girth on the low mids. And what do we got there? 270, 390. I mean, that's at 270 is nice.
Yeah.
You bring it in and it just gives you some
ugly
on drums, horrible on drums, but on electrics, it can just kind of like tie in your bass guitar and your guitars together. And
the thing is that with this era of Neve, even the ugly frequencies sound really musical. You know what I mean? So,
and this was, I believe, people will correct me if I'm wrong, which I probably am, but I had a friend that was the BBC for a couple of decades, and I think it was BBC Spec for broadcast. They specifically asked for these frequencies because they were frequencies they were continually having to pull out or boost in broadcast.
Oh, okay.
Hence why you identify them as broadcast as well.
Yeah. So there's those. These are also Tim's, and these are just 1073s. These sound fantastic. These are
they reissues?
No.
But did they? I didn't realize they ever sold them like that.
This is they were rack mounted.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So these are actually 1290s, and these are
beautiful.
What B002s, and yeah, I just think of them as 1073s.
Great. What do you use your V72s on? I have a pair.
You know, Tim uses them on almost everything. He loves them. I like them on bass. Sometimes they're too dark, and I tend to go for this.
Right.
Sometimes they're nice for, they can be nice vocals. I think that they work really well on everything. I don't know if there's any one thing that I use them on in particular.
I don't use mine as much as I should.
Is that right?
Yeah, they sit there. I think we go months without plugging them in.
Yeah.
And it's a shame because we all grew up on records, especially the Beatles, of course, that used them.
Yep.
The one thing that you just said there, which is good, and the reason why I love doing these things is because I learn and I keep hearing the same thing. Bass comes up a lot. A lot of people maybe don't use them that often, but when they do, they're like, "Oh, it's great on bass."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's exact. So if I'm recording a band, I'll make these the bass. You know what I mean? Right. And then if we're gonna get into bass overdubs, I might compare. Do it on a song by song basis.
Now the TG.
This is awesome. I love this for room mics for drums, but they don't work well in this room for room mic for drums. It's just the room doesn't excite. But if you're in a bigger, fantastic for that. I love them on piano. They're fantastic on piano. Really make things sound electric and up front. If you're gonna record pop piano, and usually for me in a pop track, a piano, if you solo it up, you're going, oh, that's way too compressed for a piano, and then you drop it in the mix, and you're like, sounds like an Elton John record, and this helps it along the way. This is really, really cool.
Now we're back to the Tube Tech.
Back to the Tube Tech,
as we were talking about earlier, is pretty darn amazing. We have one over at Harmony, and it's pretty amazing sounding.
I love it for vocals. I've used it on bass a little bit. Haven't used it on guitars, but I would. I might have used it on acoustic guitars. I don't remember. But for vocals, it's fantastic. And it's really, I tend to go 1176 or an LA2A, and this seems to, like a 251 into that is so good. It sounds really expensive.
Yeah, pretty expensive.
And it is.
Yeah.
So it should.
251 into that is very expensive.
Yeah.
Unbelievably. The central station, was that back in the day when you were just using, before you had the console here?
You know what I use that for? I use that for a couple things. For iPods. And
okay.
So I have like a little 1/8-inch cable if somebody wants to play something off their phone, and then I can switch it, and it goes toss-link out of the tower into that.
Great.
And then I also have, it goes into the headphone system if I want to use a foot switch for talkback. For me, if I'm recording a singer, I want to be writing notes or flipping playlists or making an adjustment. I don't want to give up one of my hands.
I hear you. We have foot switches
to hold down a button.
Makes sense. Yeah.
It drives me crazy when I go to a studio and there's not a.
But it's also good if you're working with another producer or a band member who's helping produce vocals. They've got one thing, you've got your own thing.
Sure. Yeah.
You're not all diving for that same button.
Yeah. No, I know.
Which doesn't sound that much of a big deal, but there's nothing more annoying than you're in the middle of speaking and somebody takes their finger off.
Yeah. No, I know. It's yeah.
Everybody needs their own control if you can.
Yep. So and. I used to use that for for actual monitor controlling, and
great.
It's okay. It sounds fine.
Okay, so tell us about this rather beautiful looking Marshall.
I think I bought this Marshall from Dwayne Dennison from Jesus Lizard. I can't remember if I bought him that or I had. But point was I had a more collectible Marshall than this, and then I was broke one month and needed to pay my rent, and one had to go, and I realized this is the better sounding one.
Yeah. So I have a JMP as well. Is this the Mark II?
I think so, yeah.
I think it's the same as mine.
I think it's a 2203 100 watt. I think it's like from '78.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the same as mine.
And it sounds great, and it goes into a 412 cabinet that permanently has a Unidyne, a U-87, and a Royer, which are my three favorite. It's never 87 and Royer. It's never 57 and Royer. You know what I mean? It's always either one of these, both of these, or this. Because it's sort of like, this is a different vibe. You know what I mean? And I'm not a big fan of blending between two speakers.
No, me neither. I never think the polarity is exactly the same.
If I was going to mix this with this, I would probably find a way to move this over onto this speaker.
Right.
And this is a Unidyne. This is actually a Mexican Unidyne. It sounds very good. I have a couple of the older original ones that I like to use on snare drum and maybe like rack tom. So this is like one setup, and then this is a AC30 with a Royer.
Yep.
And Tim uses this more than I tend. I mean, I like this and I will use it. Right. But I tend to gravitate more towards the Marshall just for what I do. And if we wanted to, every now and then, you know, if I'm gonna really get serious, I might put like the same setup on here. You know, do a 57 and an 87 on one speaker and a Royer on the other. And typically, say for example, the main guitar part will probably be a combination of these two.
Wonderful.
And then if the guy's doing something more spacey, more atmospheric, then I'll do the Royer. You know, if you do too many guitar tracks with the same setup, they just start building up in that same frequency. So I like to hedge my bets a little bit.
Well, we go back to the Beatles, and they would do a KM series.
Oh yeah.
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 So they have a dynamic and a condenser.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well. You
Because
know,
they'd both be playing for an AC30, and the way to make the guitars sound different.
I gotcha.
It's a different
That makes sense. The other nice thing about this is it doesn't really work in this room, but every now and then, if I have these three mics set up and I need more like room sound or throw, I'll just back that guy up a bit. Back it up far enough away that it won't interfere phase-wise, but it'll give me a little bit of room sound. This room is not awesome for that, so it doesn't come up very often here.
Well, talking to room, just go and check out the little drum room.
Yeah. Okay, so this setup, this is our friend Gary Sullivan is a drummer, and he plays drums with Mark and Tim. And reportedly, this is Dave Lovering's drum kit that was used on the Pixies, first few Pixies records.
Oh, lovely.
Which is, I think it's a Tama. No, it's a Pearl kick drum, but I think the toms are Tama.
Yep.
And I think it's really ugly, but it actually records really well. I usually do between 2 and 3 mics in the kick drum. It'll be a dynamic pointing at the beater. Right now it's
RE20.
RE20. It's, I've kind of rediscovered the RE20. It was a 421 for a while. I never loved D112s. Beta 52s are okay. RE20.
It's very classic 70s of you.
Yeah.
Shelley and Jack were always RE20s and 421s.
Is that right? Now,
Making Movies is a 421, he told me.
Yeah, I like 421s. I like. For me, it's about the impact. It's not low end or high end. It's how much I want to feel like I'm getting hit in the chest with the kick drum.
Well, you got those Pultecs if you want to bring that 60 back in.
Yeah, exactly. My preferred outer mic is a FET 47. We don't have that, but a Blue Mouse is, again, value. I
have a question because I've never seen anybody else do this.
Yeah.
You've got it here.
Yep.
Normally, I would put it over here to get more of this.
Yeah.
Do you find this is advantageous?
I find that I get a little more air, a little more.
Oh, okay.
So it sounds very. Sometimes I'll put it over. The one reason why it's not over here is because this is usually where the NS, like a subwoofer.
Oh,
lives.
okay, right.
So it's more just like a logistic. But I did notice, and I think I picked this up from Joe Chiccarelli, that if you stick it over the hole, then you'll get a little bit of an air blast, which is nice. In an ideal situation, there would also be an NS-10, and that's about 10 to 20% of the sound, just a little extra octave lower. Put all those, into a Pultec and try to get those all done on one track. And that's the kick
great.
drum. Yeah. Snare drum these days, this is a Unidyne, and I bought this from my friend Chris Testa, who I haven't paid him for it yet. So it's actually his until I owe him. It sounds fantastic, and if I'm really going for it, I'll tape a KM84 to it, put a pad on there. Sometimes I'll put a 414 on the top as well. I was doing 441s on the bottoms for many years, but right now I've sort of landed on the 414 on the bottom. I'm really enjoying.
I think we're discovering between us just how versatile the 414 is and how maligned it is.
The 421s on toms is sometimes I'll use 414s.
Now you're pulling back quite a way. You find you just get more development of the sound.
I just find that you just get a little bit more. You know what it is in my mind, it's like it's the balance between the crack of where the stick hits.
Yeah.
And then if you're pointed like this, then you get more just tone.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, here's the tone, but I want a little bit more presence. I'll inch it back up a little bit.
Great.
So that seems to work out pretty well. U-67s on overheads.
Very nice indeed, yes.
Oftentimes, I think, usually what I'll do is I'll point this in between the ride and the crash.
Right.
And then I'll sort of just put this on the crash, and this one goes up a little bit higher, and I just try to make sure that the snare sounds like it's in the middle.
So in the middle, yeah. Do you measure off? I usually measure.
I used to, but I feel like if I get lost, or if I feel confused, I'll do that.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes you just take a mic cable and go
exactly
and get it together.
What's on your? Is that KM?
This is a KM84 with a 10 dB pad.
That's on your hi-hat?
Just on the hi-hat, pointing it down. Maybe every now and then I'll do this, or, it's sort of casual. It's sort of a casual place.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a lovely microphone selection with you. Of course, having a pair of 67s is wonderful. Yeah. Now, what about the Coles? Is that where it is, or do you normally bring it back about here?
I'm experimenting. This is where I like it in a bigger room, but in this room, I'm not loving them here. Right. I haven't found quite the right spot for them here. In a bigger room, if I'm working at Sunset Sound or East West or one of those places, I'll have these, and then I'll usually have, if I can get them, I'll get M49s or even M50s. M49s I prefer cardioid, but I'll have those out farther, so I'll have room close and room far, but I'll print those onto one track, and I'll usually have them going into a Chandler, either the Zener or a TG1. And if they don't have those, I'll use an 1176 or anything with any compressor that has like some action to it.
Sure.
I try to get those onto one track, and just if the song is slower, then I can usually get the farther mics louder. If the song is faster, then I'll lean on these more. And in a bigger room, these at this position sound actually pretty roomy. They don't sound like they're right up as close to the drum kit as they are. In this room, they're not as successful as I would like, so I'm still experimenting with those. This is a 47 that's set up for vocals for most of the time, and it's just very easy just to turn it around and point it at the drum kit, But I always do at least one, if not two, mono microphones, and this is the one that's usually going through a Distressor or something drastic,
Right.
And the way I feel is that if I have all these microphones covering a normal drum sound, this is going to be the microphone that I'm going to really go for something.
Sure.
And when you really go for something, it means you might fail. You know what I mean? But if I fail on this, then I'll try it again with some blend of these other microphones.
Well, exactly. And if you've got good close mics, you can always feed a separate reverb from that and reproduce your room.
Or use the Ocean Way plugin is actually, sounds very convincing, is very
great.
Yeah, very useful. But this is more of like a tighter drum booth sound, which is one of the two drum sounds that I really like, know. And this was the control room in our last.
I remember in the last video we did.
In our last video, but it really seems to work as a drum room really well.
Fantastic.
We've experimented with opening up the door and putting this RCA microphone in here, and I haven't really had as much luck as some other people have.
Oh yeah. That's some fun. It's fun standing.
It's boingy.
Boingy, yeah. You want a boingy drum sound?
That's right.
Thank you.
That was awesome. My pleasure.
That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming and hanging.
I like this way around here, just because now you've got more of a hangout area there. We didn't talk keyboards, but you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You have a lot. And of course, there's a grand piano in there and a couple more keyboards. You have a lot of keyboards. Who's the keyboard guy?
Mark and Tim are sort of. Not that I don't. I took a few keyboard lessons in my day, but
Right.
Any good engineer should be able to kind of cover a pad and a chorus and, do a little
drum program.
Yeah, a little Depeche Mode, like doot, 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 doot. Yeah. But no, between Tim and Mark, we have, a B3 organ with a Leslie and Salinas, which I love and use all the time, Worley, Rhodes.
You have a lot of classics. And we could do a whole episode just on the keyboard.
Yeah. Yeah, the Mellotron, digital Mellotron gets a lot of use.
I love the way those sound.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff, and then a lot of, But that being said, a lot of stuff gets done with native instruments just in the box now.
Sure.
Especially for me, because I'm not much of a player, I need the MIDI help. So I'm just gonna use.
A lot of people need the MIDI help.
Yeah.
I have great keyboard players that just sit there and then just edit it, and I'm like, whoa, you just play to it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it becomes a crutch that people get used to. Mm-hmm. They get used to playing a performance and then quickly tightening it.
Yeah, yeah.
I've watched so many producer engineers just do that, and
But I love having access to a proper piano. And
it is inspiring when you're trying to work out a harmony to walk in another room and go ba da da, and then go da da da, and then sing over it. And
Sure.
There's just something that makes you feel like you're a real musician.
Well, and
You've
also
got a
just
piano.
even having a Whirly nearby just to go and
Sure.
and figure out keys and help people along is
Definitely.
If I'm in a control room or in a studio where there's not an instrument around that I can't find a note on, I get.
Right.
And I'm pulling up my app on my phone and hold on, let me find my mini grand piano and then go like, hey!
I've seen that. I've seen that with X Factor when we were doing all the strings. They would do like 12 songs in a day.
Yeah.
And the string arranger opened up his iPhone, went to a piano app and went bing, 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 bing.
Yeah.
And then he was like seemingly doing some random stuff. And then he ran into the live room at Sunset, the Neve room, like 2, and sat there and started changing everybody's charts.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's
handy.
great.
Yeah, it's handy.
It's
to have.
handy,
Yeah.
and I just think it's like we work in the music industry.
Yeah.
It's nice to understand music, at least to a certain extent.
Yeah, it helps. Yeah, I mean, I know that there's some engineers that don't speak music at all, but for me,
Right.
I feel like that's just how I relate to it.
I think that is perfectly fine. Don Smith wasn't a musician.
No.
I think Don Smith's drum sounds are arguably the greatest drum sounds of all time outside of Zeppelin.
Yeah.
You listen to Main Offender, any of the Stones records he did, all those Keith Richards solo records with Steve Jordan playing. I mean, go back and listen to it. I mean, it still inspired me. Such incredible. And all he did was use the right mics in the right place with a Neve, and he just knew what he was doing.
He also had that thing where you'd go and look at his EQ settings, and they would be like, "Really? You're boosting like
Well, Joe's like
200? You know? Yeah.
Joe, I was at Sunset a few weeks ago, and we were talking about Joe's EQ settings, and we looked over at the API on his kit.
Oh yeah, it's just
it's just like boost all the low, no low mids, all the high mids. It was like, really? It was just boom, 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 like this.
Yep.
But it doesn't sound like a metal kick. You'd think it would sound like a metal kick. It sounds amazing.
Yeah. No, that's Joe is certainly. He taught me that the knob. If they built it to go all the way, then turn it all the way, and then maybe plug another one in after it.
Yeah.
I think that's the Roy Thomas Baker approach to I like turning the knobs all the way. I'm learning.
Especially when you're tracking. When you
Nothing's going to blow up. You know what I mean?
Nothing's going to blow up.
You're not going to get arrested.
It's caught fire.
Yeah.
A red light came on. No. And I read you can't have a red light. Yeah, I know. All right. Thank you ever so much.
Warren.
Thanks,
bud.
So everybody, please check out Ken's course. There's going to be something flying around, and he talks about mixing a track that we did in the box. So check that out. And of course, go to producelikeapro.com, sign up for the email list, and thank you ever so much for watching. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.